My name is Ammani Johnson, and at 32, I thought I had seen the worst my family could throw at me. I was wrong, not in a subtle way, not a small way. This was the kind of humiliation that burned into your bones, etched into your memory like acid. It happened the day my parents decided to read their living will. The air in Mr. Bradshaw's penthouse office in Atlanta was thick with the scent of leather, old money, and smug superiority. The walls gleamed with polished wood panels, and the sunlight reflected off the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting my family in what seemed like a halo of entitlement. I sat at the mahogany table, my back straight, my hands clasped neatly in my lap, trying to steady my heartbeat. A single crisp $5 bill lay before me on the desk, an object so small and absurd it almost felt like a cruel joke. A fresh note, probably taken straight from my mother's Chanel wallet that morning, deliberately chosen to humiliate me. Across from me, Ania, my younger sister, was practically vibrating with excitement. Her thumbs moved frenetically across her phone, probably posting the moment to Instagram and TikTok for her thousands of followers. She was radiant, her high-pitched voice trilling with uncontained joy. $18 million, she said, her words dripping like honey. $18 million, Marcus. Can you believe it? Her husband, Marcus, a pale, slender man whose tailored suit cost more than my car, simply squeezed her hand and smiled. The man had the air of quiet, unshakable control. He would now manage her $18 million trust, a role that would only increase his influence in the family. And then there was my mother, Janelle. Pearls glinting against her designer dress, perfectly coiffed hair, a smile that could cut glass. Her gaze shifted from Anya to me, and the expression hardened. Pity, annoyance, and a touch of disgust, all in one fleeting glance. "Ammani," she said, voice smooth, controlled, dripping with condescension. "Don't look so tragic. $5 is a start. We're just teaching you accountability." My father, David, chimed in, booming from the head of the table. He wasn't just my father in that moment. He was a CEO, a man who had built his construction empire through sheer ruthlessness and a carefully maintained facade of discipline. "You work in that dusty non-profit museum," he said, gesturing at me as if I were a mere specimen under a microscope. "You don't understand the value of a dollar. This," he pointed at the $5 bill, "is a lesson." I felt the heat rise in my face, a burning flush of humiliation. But I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't give them the satisfaction. I merely stared. I let my gaze linger on my mother's pearls, my father's expensive watch, my sister's desperate hunger for attention. I held their eyes until they looked away, uncomfortable, shuffling papers, realizing that their performance wasn't as seamless as they believed. My silence was my first act of resistance. Ania, still scrolling and giggling, leaned over to Marcus. "Seriously, Ammani, don't be bitter. Frame it. Put it in your sad little apartment. $5 is probably more than your museum pays you in an hour, right?" I let her words roll off me, though the sting was real. I could feel my heartbeat trying to escape the cage of my chest, my parents' laughter, the casual cruelty, the way my sister smirked as if my suffering were entertainment. It was suffocating. But I didn't flinch. The lawyer, Mr. Bradshaw, sat silently at the side, his posture impeccable, his expression unreadable. He was waiting, like a judge in a courtroom, for the show to unfold completely. He cleared his throat lightly. "If that concludes the gifting portion of the meeting..." His words cut through the air like a knife, halting the smug rhythm of my family. My father's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about, Bradshaw? We're finished. The trust is funded. Dinner reservations at 7. But Mr. Bradshaw wasn't finished. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out another envelope, older, heavier, sealed with wax. "We are here to execute the final will and testament of Mr. Theo Johnson." The words seemed to stop time. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. Even Anya, the golden child, looked confused. "Grandpa Theo?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sudden silence. David's confident posture faltered. Marcus's controlled smile wavered for the first time. Janelle's thin smile stiffened. For a moment, the air felt charged, electric, as if reality itself had shifted. Bradshaw broke the wax seal with precision, and the smell of old paper and history filled the room. He adjusted his glasses and began reading. "I, Theodore Theo Johnson, being of sound mind and memory, do declare this to be my final will. I have watched my family over the years. I have seen how wealth can soften resolve and cloud judgment. Therefore, I leave my assets not according to what my children desire, but according to what I know of their character." My mother shifted in her seat, lips pressing together. My father's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. Anya's eyes widened. She glanced at Marcus, confused but hopeful, assuming her fortune had only multiplied. Bradshaw continued. "To my granddaughter Ania Blackwell, I leave my collection of vintage timepieces, which you have admired so often. May they remind you that time is the one thing you cannot buy back." Ania's gasp of joy sounded like a melody in that tense room. Marcus nodded subtly, pride and satisfaction evident. But then Bradshaw's gaze shifted. It settled on me. Cold, steady, unwavering. "To my granddaughter, Ammani Johnson, I leave my old problem, the brownstone in Harlem, New York, with all its contents, memories, and dust. It is yours entirely." The room erupted, not in applause, not in admiration, but laughter, harsh, barking, incredulous laughter. Ania's laugh sliced through the air like glass shattering. My father chuckled. My mother smiled thinly, pity dripping from every line of her face. The humiliation was palpable. Everyone assumed this was worthless, a token gift. They didn't understand. It was exactly what I needed. My grandfather had trusted me with the unexpected, the overlooked, the opportunity hidden beneath the rubble. My spark of curiosity flickered for the first time in years. The silence of my own resolve settled over me. I wasn't crying, I wasn't begging, I wasn't shrinking. I was watching, cataloging, and beginning to understand that this $5, this brownstone, this family's arrogance, they were all pieces in a game I was about to start playing. Because humiliation, I realized, could be transformed into power, and the first move had already begun. The room was still ringing with the echoes of laughter when Mr. Bradshaw finally folded Grandpa Theo's will and placed it carefully on the polished mahogany desk. I could feel the tension rolling off my family like heat from a furnace. Anya, still breathless from her own glee, had tears in her eyes, real or performative. It was hard to tell. Marcus gently dabbed her shoulder with the back of his hand, the picture of calm, controlled affection. He was already envisioning how he would manage the watch collection for her, probably calculating potential profits in his head, the way men like him did with inherited wealth. My mother, Janelle, clutched her pearls like a shield. Her smile remained, but it was slightly tighter now, less relaxed, as though Grandpa Theo had thrown a pebble into her meticulously built pond of control. My father's face, always so commanding, was a mask of restrained irritation. I could see it in his eyes, the gears turning, the calculations running. He had always believed he could control everything in his domain. This, apparently, was the first time he realized there might be an element outside his reach. Anya, however, was thrilled. Her hands trembled as she reached out to touch the envelope that contained the collection of vintage watches. Each one, Grandpa Theo had explained, had a story, a history, a significance. Ania's fingers traced the edges, her manicured nails brushing the wax seal, a ritualistic affirmation of her inheritance. "Oh my God, Marcus," she whispered, her voice high with excitement. Can you believe this? Grandpa Theo actually left me the watches, all of them. Every single one. Marcus nodded, but his eyes briefly flickered toward me. In that instant, I caught something fleeting, a micro-expression of doubt, almost imperceptible, quickly masked by his usual composed demeanor. Perhaps he wondered why Grandpa Theo had left me that brownstone. Perhaps he hadn't thought the old man had the nerve. "Impressive, isn't it?" my mother said, her tone brimming with smug pride. She turned to Ania and Marcus. "You both understand the value of legacy. You are the future of this family, the true stewards of our wealth and vision." She tilted her head, letting her gaze linger on me for the briefest of moments, a glance that screamed disdain, disappointment, and contempt all at once. I didn't flinch. I simply watched, noting the subtle tremor in her hand, the tiny shift in her posture, the forced brightness in her smile. My power, I realized, was observation. My silence, my stillness, it made them uncomfortable. It always had. David, my father, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. His booming voice filled the penthouse again. "Marcus, you have proven yourself an asset to this family, both financially and strategically. I trust you to manage this trust responsibly. It is not a role for everyone. Ania, you have the discernment to understand its importance. You are the chosen heir." He let the words sink into the air, watching their reactions, basking in the performance. And there I sat, invisible, a ghost in the room, but aware of every detail, every gesture, every whisper, every calculated smile. "Daddy," Anya said, her voice softening into theatrics, I don't know how to thank you. I promise we won't let you down. Right, Marcus?" "Never," Marcus said smoothly, the corners of his mouth curving in a controlled smile. A man who already counted his commissions in his head before anyone had a chance to blink. He didn't glance at me, of course. He didn't acknowledge me at all. I was a ghost in their perfect, curated world. I realized then that this wasn't a will reading. It was a coronation. A ritual where my parents validated their choices, anointing Ania as the family's golden child while casting me as the failure. The trust, the watches, the applause, it was all a performance, and I was merely a prop. And yet, as Ania and Marcus reveled in their moment of triumph, I felt the first tiny spark of something unfamiliar: curiosity. Grandpa Theo had left me the brownstone. They laughed at it now, but they didn't understand. I had lived in Harlem, walked its streets, felt its heartbeat. I understood value that wasn't tied to money, history, memory, community. These things mattered far more than any gilded watch. My mother's voice cut through my thoughts, syrupy and condescending. "Ammani, don't look so tragic. $5 and a brownstone. We are giving you the opportunity to grow." "Grow?" my father echoed, chuckling lightly. "We believe in accountability, learning to build your own wealth, lessons we both had to endure." Ania snorted, turning to Marcus with a giggle. $5 and a brownstone. Poor Ammani. That's almost sad. Maybe she can turn it into a museum or something. I ignored her. I didn't flinch. I didn't fight back. I merely watched. And in that moment, I began to plan. The air was thick with the scent of arrogance, but also, subtly, with tension. My parents believed themselves untouchable. Marcus believed he was in complete control. Ania believed herself invincible, but their confidence was built on a fragile foundation: ignorance, entitlement, and a profound underestimation of me. Grandpa Theo's words had been deliberate. He had watched them, known them, understood their weaknesses. And in that quiet, almost imperceptible way, he had handed me the tools to reclaim my power. The brownstone was more than a building. It was a legacy, a challenge, a test. And I, for the first time in years, felt the thrill of a game I was about to play. Because while they laughed, while they congratulated themselves, I knew something they didn't. This inheritance was not a punishment. It was a weapon. A weapon I intended to use wisely. The laughter of my family still echoed in the corners of Mr. Bradshaw's penthouse office, a sharp, cruel reminder of how thoroughly they had underestimated me. Ania was practically glowing with delight, her manicured fingers tracing the wax-sealed envelope containing her inheritance. Marcus stood nearby, the epitome of calm composure, though I could see the faint twitch in his jaw that betrayed even the slightest unease. My parents, of course, were beaming, smug in their performance, certain that their chosen heir had already won the day. And there I sat, invisible to them but fully aware, silently cataloging every gesture, every laugh, every misplaced sense of superiority. Their world, constructed with precision over decades, felt brittle and hollow in that moment. Every chuckle, every dismissive glance they threw my way became data points in the blueprint I was beginning to draft silently in my mind. Then, cutting through the smug symphony, came Mr. Bradshaw's voice, quiet but authoritative. Before we conclude, there is one final matter to address. The room stilled instantly. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. My father's head tilted, a brow raised in irritation. Bradshaw, we're finished. The trust is funded, dinner awaits, and Ania's inheritance is settled. What more could there possibly be? Bradshaw's expression did not waver. He adjusted his glasses, producing another envelope from his briefcase. It was older than the others, edges worn, a wax seal stamped with Grandpa Theo's unmistakable crest. This envelope contains the final will and testament of Mr. Theodore Johnson. It is to be read only in the presence of all heirs and at this specific meeting. My mother stiffened, her pearls glinting in the afternoon light. My father's hand tightened around the arm of his chair. Marcus's composed mask flickered just slightly, a micro-expression I didn't miss. And Ania froze, her phone forgotten in her hand. The room felt suddenly tight, oppressive, as if the walls themselves had shrunk to hold the collective tension. The smug certainty that had floated through the room just moments ago evaporated. For the first time that day, the family hierarchy seemed vulnerable, unsteady, and I could taste the electricity of anticipation in the air. Bradshaw broke the wax seal with precision. The paper inside smelled faintly of old ink and aged parchment. He adjusted his glasses again, cleared his throat, and began reading in a deep, measured baritone. I, Theodore Theo Johnson, being of sound mind and memory, declare this my final will. I have observed my family over the years and have seen the softening of character that wealth can bring. My intention is not to distribute assets based on desire, but based on what I know of each person's integrity, resilience, and true understanding of legacy. The words cut through the room like a knife. My parents exchanged a glance, uncertainty flickering over their perfectly polished facades. Ania's gasp was audible. "Grandpa?" she whispered, her voice trembling as if the word itself had weight beyond comprehension. Bradshaw continued, his gaze sweeping the room. To my granddaughter, Ania Blackwell, I leave my collection of vintage timepieces. Each watch holds a story, a lesson, a moment in history. May they remind you that time is the one commodity that cannot be bought, borrowed, or regained. Ania's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Marcus gave a subtle nod, already calculating potential gains in his mind. My parents leaned forward, faces painted with satisfaction and pride. This was, to them, a perfect outcome, a reward to the chosen heir, validation of their judgment. And then, Bradshaw's gaze shifted toward me, slowly, deliberately. The room seemed to compress around the space between us, and in that moment, I felt all the eyes of the family lock onto me. To my granddaughter, Ammani Johnson, Bradshaw read, his voice even but carrying weight. "I leave my old problem, a brownstone in Harlem, New York, including all its contents, memories, and accumulated history. It is yours entirely." Time froze. Silence fell over the room like a heavy curtain. Anya erupted first, a sharp, barking laugh that was half disbelief, half ridicule. "His junk? A crumbling building in Harlem? Grandpa, did you even mean this?" My mother's thin, practiced smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning. My father chuckled, shaking his head, as though the entire scene was a quaint anomaly, a final eccentricity of a sentimental old man. Marcus, however, finally allowed a flicker of doubt to pass across his otherwise controlled expression. It was surreal. Their certainty, their hierarchy, had cracked. Their laughter, their mockery, the self-congratulatory smiles. They were beginning to sense that Grandpa Theo's decision was not arbitrary. Bradshaw paused, allowing the words to resonate. "The brownstone is not a liability," he clarified, as though reading my family's minds. "It is a test, a legacy, a challenge. To truly understand its value, one must see beyond the immediate, beyond the visible wealth. This property, with its history and its people, is a living reminder that value is not measured by currency alone." I caught my mother's lips pressing together. Her eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes that had always judged me as lesser, darted to my face. There was confusion there, a subtle flicker of fear she quickly buried beneath her habitual condescension. My father's jaw clenched, fingers drumming against the polished wood as he struggled to maintain the illusion of control. Marcus, for all his composure, exhaled silently, the weight of the unexpected inheritance suddenly sinking in. Anya, oblivious to the layers of meaning, tilted her head, eyes wide. "So, that's it? That's all Ammani gets? Just the brownstone?" I didn't answer. I simply studied them. Their overconfidence, their mockery, their entitlement. They were all exposed. And in that moment, I felt the first true spark of power, subtle but undeniable. Grandpa Theo had entrusted me with the overlooked, the underestimated, the forgotten. My inheritance was not a gift, it was a weapon, and I was beginning to understand how to wield it. My parents, however, didn't see it. They saw only a crumbling building, dust, memories, and inconvenience. But I, who had spent years walking the streets of Harlem, understanding its heartbeat, its history, its potential, knew better. This was my arena, and they had walked in assuming I was powerless. I felt a flicker of amusement, barely perceptible, as the room adjusted to this new, unexpected tension. Grandpa Theo had orchestrated the ultimate twist, leaving me something the others couldn't immediately measure or mock, but which, in time, would reveal its true worth. And in that quiet, suspended moment, I realized something fundamental. Their arrogance was my advantage. They laughed now, but they had no idea the real game had just begun. Because while they reveled in Ania's inheritance, while they congratulated themselves, I began to formulate a plan. A strategy to take what they thought was worthless and turn it into something far greater than their $18 million trust, far greater than their curated lives of comfort. I had the brownstone. I had the challenge. I had the spark. And I had the determination to show my family, all of them, that measuring worth wasn't about money, it was about vision, courage, and strategy. For the first time in years, I felt alive. The laughter, the mocking smiles, and the air of self-satisfied entitlement lingered in my parents' penthouse office long after Mr. Bradshaw had finished reading Grandpa Theo's final will. Ania, still clutching the envelope with her precious watches, glared at me with a mix of disbelief and condescension, as if I had personally insulted her. Marcus's composed mask remained, but the slight tightening of his jaw betrayed the same unease that had passed over my father when the brownstone was announced. I, however, felt a quiet sense of exhilaration. Grandpa Theo had left me the brownstone in Harlem, a building that, to them, was junk, dust, and a pile of old memories. But to me, it was potential. History had a heartbeat, and this building, neglected and overlooked, held the rhythm of generations, waiting for someone who could see beyond the decay. I didn't speak. I didn't flinch. I simply observed. Ania's high-pitched laughter at what she called my inheritance reverberated through the office, but her mockery no longer stung. It was fuel. Grandpa Theo had known what he was doing. He had crafted a challenge, one that would reveal character, strategy, and intelligence far more than any fortune could. As soon as the meeting concluded, I left the penthouse quietly, ignoring the whispered congratulations and the lingering looks of pity from my parents. The $5 bill my mother had handed me sat in my wallet, untouched, a reminder of how little they understood about true value. I took a cab to Harlem, clutching the envelope that contained the deed to the brownstone. The streets I walked were alive with stories, with people who had fought, loved, and survived. I felt a surge of energy. I had a legacy to uncover, a life to reclaim, and a challenge no one else could see. The brownstone itself was a sight to behold, though not in a glamorous way. Its brick facade was chipped, paint peeling in long vertical strips, and the wrought iron railings were rusted. Windows were boarded up in some places, cracked in others. But I didn't see decay. I saw possibility. Grandpa Theo's note had mentioned that the building contained all its memories, its dust, and all the junk. Words that sounded mocking on paper, but in reality, they were clues. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the smell of old wood and forgotten stories. Broken furniture leaned against walls, and stacks of newspapers lay in disorganized piles. Paintings hung crookedly, some torn, some intact. Every room whispered history. Every object had a story. And it was all mine. I walked slowly, absorbing everything, the patterns of wear on the floorboards, the fingerprints left in the dust, the faded ink on yellowed pages. I ran my hand across a bookshelf lined with old family photographs, some with names written on the back in fading ink. I could almost hear Grandpa Theo's voice, guiding me silently. Look beyond the surface, Ammani. There is value here that money cannot measure. Hours passed as I explored the brownstone, cataloging items, taking mental notes. Some things were obviously valuable: antique furniture, old coins, rare books. Others seemed mundane: chipped mugs, torn curtains, dusty manuscripts. But I knew that in these overlooked details, there was a treasure trove of opportunity. It wasn't just financial, it was history, memory, and potential influence. By nightfall, I sat on the edge of a worn sofa in what had been the library, flipping through a ledger Grandpa Theo had left behind. The pages detailed financial transactions, family expenses, and notes in his precise handwriting. But hidden among the mundane were hints, letters from old tenants, mentions of rare artifacts, even references to properties purchased decades ago that had been forgotten or undervalued. A plan began forming in my mind. This wasn't just about restoring a building. This was about reclaiming power, turning what my family considered worthless into something monumental. If they thought the brownstone was a joke, I would make them eat those assumptions. Every sneer, every mocking laugh, every dismissive comment, they would all be fuel for my ascent. I also began to realize the true depth of Grandpa Theo's strategy. Ania and Marcus had been given something tangible, something flashy, something that satisfied their superficial desires. But I had been entrusted with a living puzzle, one that would require creativity, intelligence, and resilience to unlock its true value. While they reveled in what they already had, I had been given the foundation to build something far greater. Over the next few days, I delved deeper into the brownstone, uncovering hidden rooms, safes, and forgotten spaces. Every discovery felt like a victory, a small confirmation that Grandpa Theo had believed in me, had known that I could see beyond the obvious. I began envisioning how the building could be transformed, not just restored, but elevated into a symbol of influence, wealth, and legacy. And all the while, my family remained blissfully unaware. Ania was still celebrating her watches, Marcus still managing the $18 million trust, and my parents were basking in the illusion that their choices had cemented the hierarchy. They didn't see the storm forming quietly, deliberately, in Harlem. They didn't see that their arrogance, their condescension, and their mockery were sowing the seeds of their own downfall. As I stood on the top floor of the brownstone, looking out at the Harlem skyline, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope, purpose, and power. Grandpa Theo's final words echoed in my mind. To truly understand the value of legacy, one must look beyond money. I knew that the brownstone was not just a building, it was a statement, a challenge, a key, and I held it in my hands. This was no longer about humiliation or being dismissed as the family failure. This was about reclaiming my narrative, reshaping my destiny, and showing my family that their definition of worth was shallow and flawed. The brownstone wasn't just a property, it was the first move in a game that I intended to win completely. The brownstone in Harlem had become more than a property. It had become my arena, my laboratory, and my battlefield. Every corner I explored whispered possibility. Every dusty ledger, forgotten artifact, and hidden room was a puzzle piece that, when assembled, would reveal a legacy far greater than the $18 million trust my family so proudly celebrated. My parents, Ania and Marcus, were still floating in the bubble of their own arrogance, assuming that their wealth and titles made them untouchable. But I had discovered a truth they had never considered. True power comes from vision, courage, and creativity, not inherited money. I began by cataloging everything in the brownstone. Old letters, photographs, and documents revealed long-forgotten assets: art, rare antiques, historical manuscripts, and even connections to wealthy tenants and influential Harlem families that my grandfather had quietly maintained over the decades. Each discovery was a small victory, each piece a tool I could leverage. Meanwhile, I quietly started transforming the brownstone. Not with grand renovations at first, that would be too obvious, but with strategic positioning. I hosted small, discreet gatherings of artists, historians, and community leaders who could appreciate the history and potential of the building. Slowly, word spread. The once dilapidated property became a hub of culture, history, and influence. My sister Ania and Marcus remained completely unaware of the slow revolution taking place under their noses. While they flaunted their watches and counted their trust earnings, I was building something tangible, something respected, something that couldn't be mocked or taken away. The first time I saw the ripple effect of my strategy was at a local auction. I had discovered a collection of rare Harlem-era photographs hidden in the brownstone. With careful research, I authenticated them and showcased them to collectors. The result? A bidding war that far exceeded anything I had imagined. The brownstone's reputation grew, and suddenly I wasn't just Ammani Johnson, the failure in my parents' eyes. I was the granddaughter who could see value where no one else could. Then came the subtle but satisfying moment: my parents' curiosity. They heard whispers about the brownstone. Anaya's friends posted about it online, sharing photos of events and artifacts. Marcus, always alert to financial opportunities, finally asked for a report. I provided a modest overview, underplaying everything, letting them believe it was trivial. But in private, I continued to scale the operation. Weeks turned into months. The brownstone became a cultural landmark, drawing investors, historians, and media attention. Every article, every mention, Every photograph was a silent rebuke to my family, a testament to what they had dismissed as junk. The pinnacle came one crisp autumn afternoon. My parents, Ania and Marcus, arrived in Harlem, ostensibly to see what Ammani was doing with that old building. They were dressed in their finest, carrying expressions of condescension mixed with curiosity. I greeted them at the entrance, standing tall, confident, radiating the calm power that had taken months to cultivate. "Welcome to your inheritance in action," I said simply. Ania gasped. Marcus's jaw tightened. My mother's pearls caught the sunlight, but her smile faltered. My father's booming voice was nowhere to be heard. He was speechless, taking in the bustling gallery, the crowd of people who respected, admired, and valued what I had created. "This," I continued, gesturing around, "is not just a brownstone. It's a legacy, a living tribute to history, culture, and community. And it was my grandfather who trusted me to see its true potential." My parents were stunned. Ania's laughter, once sharp and mocking, was gone. Marcus's controlled demeanor cracked, replaced by a flicker of anger and awe. For the first time, they saw me not as the failure, the burden, the scapegoat, but as someone who could outperform, outthink, and outlast them all. I didn't rub it in. I didn't need to. The success of the brownstone spoke for itself. The investments, the cultural influence, the media coverage. It was proof of my vision and resilience. And then I revealed the final touch. A discreet yet highly lucrative partnership with a major museum, bringing parts of the brownstone's rare collection to national and international attention. Offers poured in, far surpassing anything Ania's watches or the $18 million trust could achieve. The family's fortune, once a symbol of their superiority, now seemed shallow and superficial in comparison. I turned to them, calm, collected, unshakable. "This is what happens," I said softly. "When you underestimate someone, when you define their value by your own arrogance." I was given a challenge, and I turned it into an empire of memory, culture, and influence, all without your approval or support. My mother's lips pressed tightly. My father's hands shook slightly. Ania's face drained of color, and Marcus looked as if he had just realized the ground beneath him had shifted. I smiled, not out of cruelty, but out of triumph, clarity, and justice. This was not revenge in the petty sense. It was vindication. I had reclaimed my dignity, rewritten my family's narrative, and proven that wealth measured in currency alone is nothing without vision, resilience, and courage. From that day forward, the brownstone stood not just as a building, but as a monument to underestimated power, to the granddaughter who refused to be dismissed. And every time my family looked at it, every time they heard of its success, they were reminded of one undeniable truth. They had measured value poorly, and I, Ammani Johnson, had emerged not as their failure, but as the heir to a legacy they could never truly understand. A woman who had turned dust, memories, and mockery into triumph, influence, and undeniable power. The $5 bill in my wallet? A relic. A symbol of a day that had almost broken me, but ultimately made me unstoppable. Because humiliation, I learned, was only the beginning. The real power came when you turned it into victory.